Hi, my name is Tim Accurso, and I'm the Principal Pianist for Opera Santa Barbara. I'm an October baby, and so I've always loved all things horror, supernatural, demons, serial killers, everything in between. And so I had this idea that I wanted to explore paranormal in opera, but also the supernatural in Santa Barbara. So we decided to partner with Julianne Brown from Santa Barbara Ghost Tours, and she took us on a lovely walking tour of Santa Barbara to tell us some of the ghost stories. Now, as you'll see from her part of the video, a lot of the ghosts in Santa Barbara are really friendly, but some of the opera ghosts are not always the most friendly. But opera from the very beginning has had elements of the supernatural and even horror. Opera was invented in about 1597 by composer Jacopo Peri, and his first opera was Euridice, which is the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. They were lovers in Greek mythology, and Eurydice is killed by a fatal snakebite, and she goes to the underworld, and Orpheus ventures to the underworld to try to save her. This story has been seen in operas for hundreds of years. So it started with Peri with his Euridice. The next composer was Monteverdi in 1607, wrote, which is the first opera that's still performed today, L'Orfeo, Gluck's Orpheus and Eurydice. We had Offenbach's Orpheus in the Underworld, and even in 2020, LA Opera premiered a new opera by composer Matthew O'Coin called Eurydice. Another really popular supernatural operatic tale is the story of Faust, which is based on the German legend and the play by Goethe. And pretty much Faust is an aging scholar who desires knowledge and pleasure and youth again, and he makes a deal with the demon Mephistopheles. And so this bartering with the devil has been adapted by Gounod in Gounod's Faust, Berlioz, The Damnation of Faust. We have Boito's opera Mephistophele, and even Stravinsky's The Rake's Progress deals with this theme. And we have a lot of ghosts in opera as well. Probably the most famous ghost that we have is the Commendatore in Don Giovanni. He's killed by Don Giovanni in the beginning of the opera and returns as the statue at the end to drag him to the depths of hell. We have Wagner's The Flying Dutchman, a ghostly sea captain who wanders the sea for eternity, but is granted an opportunity for redemption by an angel. So every 7 years he can go to shore for 24 hours only, and if he can find a woman to love him, then the curse will be lifted. We see ghosts and supernatural told throughout the centuries, and operas are still being written today that have horror themes. We have actually just released on Netflix a couple weeks ago was The Haunting of Bly Manor, and that's based on the novel by Henry James, The Turn of the Screw. In 1954, Benjamin Britten adapted this work into a haunting chamber opera. Also, 2016, Minnesota Opera saw the premiere of The Shining, based on the Stanley Kubrick film and the novel by Stephen King. We have Philip Glass. He wrote an opera based on the Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And actually, Claude Debussy also wrote an opera of The Fall of the House of Usher, but unfortunately he died before it was completed. I always like to tell everyone there's an opera for everyone. So whether you like the romantic things, the comedies, or if you like Halloween, ghoul chasing, serial killers, there's something for everyone. So enjoy our paranormal tour of Santa Barbara, and happy Halloween.
Hi, I'm Julianne Brown, and I'm a professor at Santa Barbara City College, and I'm the founder of Santa Barbara Ghost Tours. So you're going to hear a few wonderful stories about our city of friendly ghosts, which right over here you have the El Centro building. In the 1930s, there were two gangs, Chinese gangs in town, and both of the leaders were always vying to get the best piece of real estate. Well, there was a certain piece of real estate that one gang member leader wanted more than the other. And when it was usurped from under him, he put out a hit on the other gang leader. So on the night of a formal event at the Chinese Masonic Temple, which was right over here at the El Centro building on this side, the gang member that got the land was about to take his wife, to get her from the other side of the car. He comes out, two cars come out, and this is the first drive-by shooting in Santa Barbara history. Two cars come and they riddle him with bullets. Then 6 people in each car came out and dropped the most beautiful guns around the body. Well, on the other side of the El Centro building was the Chinese Community Center, where the boys were watching all of this. So they come out and they pick up all the guns, and some take them home. So according to Neil Graffey, our historian, who spoke with the grandson of the judge said it was the perfect crime. They couldn't identify who were the murderers. Okay, so our ghost. For a long time, there was a light at the El Centro building that actually communicated with the light over here. And I wondered why, and I had not heard that story. And so what it was is the widow of the slain gang member, she comes back to remember that night, and she wanted her story told, and now it is being told. So glad I get to tell you about the famous Libero Theater, the most haunted building in the state of California. And the reason it's haunted is that for 10 years, the Victorians and the Edwardians, the wealthy, would come from LA on the trains, and they would have the top psychics of the world hold seances for 10 years. And they summoned the dead, which you should not do because you don't know what you'll get. And then Tuesday night was local night, and it was actually held in the basement. So twice a week, they summoned the dead. So my favorite story was a guest on a ghost tour, and I do have his phone number. He was Chumash and Spanish, and this is the story. He said, "Oh, I have a story for you. I wasn't the best kid at Santa Barbara High." And his wife goes, "Oh, he's got to tell you the story." Well, it seems that the teacher for the homeroom had instituted community service. So she said, "You're going to go to the Libero Theater, and whatever the staff needs you to do, you will do." So he went up, his mother dropped him off, this is before cell phones, and he said, "Where do you want me to go?" "Into the basement." So he's in the basement and he's cleaning up, and all of a sudden he hears a ruffle or something behind him, and he knew there was nothing behind him. So he turned around, and all of a sudden he saw this woman with curls, tight curls, and a big dress. It was the sound of her petticoats coming towards him with no face. He saw that, he screamed louder than he'd ever screamed before, and he ran up the stairs, and he ran out the front of the Libero to the first business that had a phone. "Mom, pick me up, quick!" So he tells everybody that he could at Santa Barbara High about the woman with no face. Well, his teacher heard of it, and she said, "You have embarrassed Santa Barbara High." He said, "Oh, but teacher, this woman had no face." "Well, I'm going with you next Monday." So she did. So he said, we were in the basement, and I felt safe having my teacher there. So I'm cleaning up. All of a sudden, she screams at the top of her lungs, "We need to get out of here, quick!" So he followed her, and she began to hyperventilate out in front of the theater. And he said, "You saw her too. We're never talking about this again, and you never have to come back, and neither does anyone else."
Wow.
That's one of my favorite stories.
How long did the seances continue?
10 years, but that was in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So because they summoned the dead for 10 years, twice a week, that's one of the reasons it's the most haunted of all buildings. And most people that have grown up in Santa Barbara that do performances here will share stories of their costumes not being where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
The stage light is moved, and there's several people that have died in the theater that they see them out in the audience.
Yeah, I've heard that a little bit. I've heard that one of them is a little bit of a trickster, so it's funny, I didn't know that, because we perform here twice a year usually in two of our productions, and it's fascinating to learn more about it, and especially to go as far back as the 1800s. So.
Yeah, it was really fun to do the research on the seances.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. So Santa Barbara had a very large Chinese population, and they also had a Japanese population. We're here in what was once part of Japantown, which went all the way past the Presidio. The Presidio was actually made into a Buddhist temple during that time. And when Miss Chase had what was left of the Presidio purchased. It was repurposed again to look like it was during the Spanish period. So our story here is a love story. The Chinese and the Japanese did not associate much with each other. There was a kind of racism that the Japanese in our town were the newcomers. Well, love doesn't have, love is blind, deaf and dumb. So a Japanese girl and a Chinese boy fell in love, and they knew that they couldn't stay in Santa Barbara. So they planned on, upon graduation from high school, eloping. But life being as it is, the Japanese were sent to detention camps, and they were separated. And when she came back to Japantown with her family, she caught pneumonia, and she died. And they say that she comes back here every so often to remember their love and what their opportunity could have been. So her name is Kana, and so hopefully they're together in the afterlife, but occasionally she likes to come back and reminisce. So over here you're looking at the second oldest building in the state of California, and of course the oldest in Santa Barbara. It's El Cartel. These were, according to what I've been told, officers' housing throughout the time of the Presidio. And when the Spanish period began, it was junior officers' quarters. And the reason it's standing, legend has it, is because of Lucia. Lucia sadly only had 3 children, which was not a lot back then. But to compensate, she became the most welcoming of all people in Santa Barbara. You could knock at her door and she would feed you and welcome you, and you just had a warm feeling. Well, when the Spanish learned that Mexico had won the war, they were waiting for the Spanish Comandante to come, and he did. He called all the officers to him, and he had some men go and look at all of the buildings. Well, 2 knocked at Lucia's door, and she said, "Please come in." Well, they began to harass her and told her, "We're going to kick you Spanish out or whatever, and you're going to lose your home." And she said, "What did you say? I'm not going to be living here." So she went and got a poker or some other instrument, and she beat them both to a pulp. She took the almost ear off of one and the eye out of another. They went running back to the Comandante. "There's a crazy woman, reinforcements!" And as soon as they said woman, everyone laughed. And the Comandante said, "Whose wife is this?" And Lucia's husband raised his hand. "Oh, Comandante, my wife is always welcoming to everyone, and they mustn't have been very good when they came in our house. And she has a temper, and she's extremely loyal." Comandante essentially said, "I want her on our team." So he got to keep his job, and she got to keep her house. And it's said that the reason this building remains is because she watches over it. During the pandemic, there are people walking by her house. Somebody broke into her backyard, and over the last 2 months, she's been putting crosses on her door. So we're going to come and see them. So you guys, if you're here when Lucia's here and it's not a pandemic, the front room is where they all slept, and it's ice cold. If she's not here, it's just a cool adobe. The crosses have been slowly forming, so there's 4 now. So remember, if you come to visit Lucia's house in the future, make sure you are very hospitable, and you go into the house, and if you go into the front room and it's freezing cold, Lucia's visiting. If it's just cool, it's an adobe. She was a Christian, and this is her house. Stay away from my house. I've been protecting it for 200 years. Don't pee on my house, don't leave your bikes here, and don't break into my backyard. So the building we're going to see right now is what is the only visible standing building that shows that this was once Chinatown. It was the most happiest bar, Jimmy Choo's bar, And then his wife, Nui, had the Chinese restaurant next door. So here you see Jimmy and one of his sons, one of his other sons. There were 2 boys and 1 daughter, and they were a very happy family. And the ghost story about Jimmy's has to do with a story that happens on a Wednesday or a Thursday night. At least it did 20 years ago. And maybe men don't mention it now. If you're there drinking at the last bar stool and you tell, all of a sudden you begin to have a massage on your neck. You'll feel like your ears are being blown into, and maybe you'll smell some perfume. I wouldn't say it was cheap perfume. And you'll fall off the stool. I got validated by this. I had a lady that worked at the rec center when she was young, and I believe she works for the Montecito Bank. I've seen her at activities. And she said, you know, I used to take care of the elderly there. And one day a lady said, you know, dear, it's always been expensive to live in Santa Barbara. So we had to have side jobs. And another one said to her, I had one of those jobs too. So they both came and told her that they were independent contractors, and they made friends with the bartenders, and they knew what their rotation was. They all lived in their own apartments, and they would wear a certain shawl. One lady said she wore a red cashmere shawl, the other wore a purple one. They would come in, pay the bartender, and then they would begin to introduce themselves to their patron. So it seems one of them is still coming back. Now we're going to go to where it was once a Chinese tenement. And of course, after the Spanish colonial revival, it changed. And now it's beautiful apartments. So you have to use your imagination and think about what the smells and the life would have been like. And I had a story of one of the ghosts that's not so pleasant of Santa Barbara, and I have a picture of him that was up there, and I had a young girl with her family take the film. I was talking about another ghost here. What's very interesting is I would always point down this hall, which you'll see in just a minute, and say the opium den is to the right. And during the Chinese period, it was fine. Then Westerners came, and they put a bordello, and the opium den no longer was self-regulated and part of the Chinese culture. So a spirit down there came up that day, snuck out before it was beaten back there, and went back into the opium den basement. I was talking with a bartender at Intermezzo, and I was dressed in a costume that night, and he said, what are you doing? I go, I'm giving a ghost tour. He goes, did you know that there's a demon behind Say Cheese, which is now the new cheese shop? And I thought, actually I do. I just took a picture. I just saw a picture of him last week. And so I had 2 architects, and when I took them down there and told the story, both of them said, you can see that those 2 doors were raised, and that indicates that that was where the illicit behavior of the opium den with the Westerners occurred. So. These 2 areas here would have been where the entry was to the opium den, and this is where Say Cheese was. So when you do ghost tours, you get a little bit of, you become a detective, and things come together. Okay? So you can see the chapel of the non-denominational church. It has wedding bells in wrought iron. And the family that built it knew that there were people who could not marry, and back in 1913, it was based on religion. So, or race, just like, you know, our Japanese girl and the Chinese boy. So you would come to Santa Barbara and you could marry here with your friends. So this is a beautiful place. And it was once part of the Presidio. We're here in the front of City Hall, but before it was City Hall, There were several businesses that were made up of shacks. And in Walter Tompkins' book, he talked about another person, and that was when I heard about until the cobbler beheaded his wife, and then no one would come to the corner, and City Hall bought the land for a song. Jillian from Deep Sea Winery told me that since she was a little girl, they have been unable to grow grass here, which it might be because of the murder. So the murder actually happened where that bush is. When City Hall did their landscaping, they didn't want people to stand at the site of the murder. Here's the story. 1921, Stefano, a cobbler, and his wife Wilhelmina, Swiss wife, and their daughter, lived in one of those kind of shacks where he fixed shoes, and again, they lived there. Wilhelmina fixed homes, and there was not domestic violence often talked about in Santa Barbara. The police station was close to here, like across the street, nearly across the street, and they had heard Wilhelmina and Stefano fight. And according to the Santa Barbara News Press, that I did research on the story after reading it in Walter Tompkins' book, this is what the news press said. After a morning of sweet embraces, do I have to explain? Stefano began yelling at Wilhelmina, "You're cheating on me." And she said, "Why do you say that? I clean houses." So this time he took her head, put it between his thighs, took his strongest serrated leather knife and slowly sawed off her head. It was extremely painful. He put it on the table and went across, covered with blood, to the police station. "Stefano, what happened?" said the officers. "I let the air out. She talk no more." I didn't have to take pictures of that article. I memorized it instantly. So they said, "Where's Wilhelmina?" "She talk no more." So they arrested him, went across the street, and sadly, this is before TV, they mentioned that the youngest recruit, trying to be a hero, opened the front door, and when seeing Wilhelmina's head, he began to vomit profusely. So, of course, the older sergeant had to say, "You've got to leave." Then someone remembered that they had a daughter. So Pearl Chase had the Christmas shop, which is now the Unity store, and they called someone to meet their daughter. But first they asked Stefano, "Where's your daughter?" "She no good. I should have killed her too." Fortunately, as the newspaper said, when the daughter came to go home, Lydia, a rather bright girl, a fourth grader at Lincoln School, when told her mother was dead, shook her head and said, "I'm not surprised." So immediately after the murder, people saw things, heard things, and then it wasn't until 1971 that there was another sighting. Apparently, a girl and a woman holding hands, a little girl, were seen walking up the stairs and through the door in City Hall. I had a psychic from New Jersey and her sister, who's an actress in Hollywood, and the mother who brought the daughter from New Jersey, that's a psychic, on a surprise trip to Santa Barbara, was on this trip, and she's the one that told me she never saw more ghosts in her life. On Cabrillo, she didn't even know where she was, in every kind of dress, and they're walking through people and they're happy and visiting. She said, is this where ghosts go on vacation? Yes, it is. So after we finished the ghost tour, the psychic daughter, "You said there isn't any other activity?" "Well, Wilhelmina is here every time you bring guests, and she stands on the top stair. She's protecting them from Stefano, who is thrown most likely in the basement of City Hall, because that's what the good ghosts do here when there's anybody that irritates them and irritates visitors to Santa Barbara." So she said, I said, "Well, what does she look like?" And before there was a motion detector light here, it was very dark. And she said she has long black hair, and she had a long white robe, and it went up to here with beautiful ribbons. And she's so full of happiness and joy because she's protecting all of your guests from the vicious evilness of Stefano. Everyone that comes here wants to just be happy. So they just toss the negative ghosts into the basements to not irritate them or anyone else coming to enjoy Santa Barbara. Isn't that nice news?
I feel protected.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're everywhere. No, I've been touched. You know, this is a city of friendly ghosts. There's so many stories, but it's like I didn't have invisible friends as an only child. I have invisible friends now.